Thank you, and welcome to the 5th annual Connors, the annual award show that I do every single year, where I talk about some of my favorite movies of the year. You guys have been following along all of these past 5 years, and I think the cult of Connor has been growing strong. This, of course, is a different type of video that I do every single year. It's my 5th one of these. And I essentially have my own award show. I give a bunch of categories, I give my thoughts and my own nominations, including my own winners, and I break it down. Of course, this is a long video, as I like to do it, so if you're interested in the Oscar content, please stay tuned next week and the regular program scheduling. Tomorrow, I'll have my predictions video, another spin-off, a little bit of a different kind of a video that we do every single year that I have a blast with. So you can call it my top 10 movies of the year, you can call it my best lead actor, lead actress videos, and you may see some of your Oscar favorites, but each and every year I have my own different kind of taste as attested to for the past few years, including some weird picks in some different categories that the Oscars have, like best trailer and best ensemble, as well as some of the more traditional ones like best cinematography. The categories change every single year. Sometimes I'll do best soundtrack. Most of the times I've been doing something like best score, which is I'm going to be missing from this year because if I didn't have a passionate winner in score or a bunch of nominees I wanted to talk about, I didn't do it. But I've also introduced a couple of new categories this year. First one being best first time filmmaker, which I'm very excited about. I'll explain them as I'm announcing them, but stay tuned. Check the description if you want to just hear my thoughts on my top 10 movies of the year. That'll be of course at the end of the video, and you can jump around by the timestamps in the video, but please stay tuned, come along the ride, and hear my thoughts on some of my favorite acting performances and some different fun categories that hopefully you like and appreciate. And ultimately, these are my picks. There's no one else picking it. This is not based on Oscar relevance or anything like that. It's just my opinion, and not necessarily even what the best is. It's just what my favorite is. So I have to get that out of the way at the top, per usual, but this is a long video, so let's just jump right into the first category, which is going to be Best Supporting Actress. So the nominees are Andrea Riseborough, Possessor; Elizabeth Debicki, Tenet; Maya Rudolph, Hubie Halloween; Belle Powley, The King of Staten Island; and Mary Steenburgen, Happiest Season. And the winner is Andrea Riseborough, Possessor. So as the award show goes, I want to talk about all my nominees quickly, and then my winner and why I chose it as the winner. So starting off, Elizabeth Debicki from Tenet. Tenet was a divisive movie for me. I thought it was very cool and interesting, but I also sort of struggled with some of the more complex elements and left me a little bit frustrated at the end of it, despite it being just a total great action movie. But I've been a huge fan of Debicki ever since I really sort of saw her in the first, I guess in the second Guardians of the Galaxy, but really with Widows a couple of years ago. She was so terrific in, and I was so excited to see her in a Nolan project, because I thought she would be perfect for his sort of world, in the same way Widows was Michael Mann-esque, the same way Christopher Nolan's movies are also in sort of this slick crime intelligent movies that I'm such a big fan of, and she fits in perfectly here. She sort of subverts, in my opinion, the Nolan dead wife trope by being an actual character with depth, and has a large part of the emotional relationship within the movie and the connection to the movie that I felt is in her performance. She sort of rocks the sort of elegance and the Bond girlfriend kind of an element, but twisted on her head, and does make her her own character, and sort of toes that line between sophisticated but vulnerable in a really terrific way. And she's one of my favorite actresses, so to see her in a big budget movie like this, where she totally pulls it off, I had to give her some recognition. The next one, you may be surprised, Maya Rudolph for Hubie Halloween. I just feel like Maya Rudolph is one of the most consistently great actors and comedy actors, period, and consistently gives great work over and over again, yet of course never gets recognized for most of it. And Hubie Halloween was a movie I really enjoyed. It's a movie that's on Netflix. It's a great sort of Halloween movie. It's not an amazing movie, but I think it's a little bit of an Adam Sandler return to form for his comedies. I think probably his best Netflix movie. And Maya Rudolph had me laughing for pretty much the whole time. She has these great little parts, being the bride of Frankenstein, going around the town sort of making fun of Hubie as everyone else does, and she has just some of the best comedic timing. So I laughed so much, and probably my favorite comedic performance of the year was my Rudolph. So, you know, hey, I want to recognize those performances too. It's not everything to do with just acting and dramatic elements. The comedic element is also really funny and really important. So I wanted to nominate her. Belle Powley, The King of Staten Island, a movie that I think has sort of been forgotten, but she's so terrific in it as Pete Davidson's sort of on-again, off-again girlfriend, and does actually provide the sort of opposite, where we have a Bill Burr and Marissa Tomei and their sort of romance, but I actually think the underrated element is Pete Davidson and Belle Powley and their sort of back and forth, and a great sort of capture with the writing of Judd Apatow, but really also how Belle portrays herself as this sort of young or millennial, almost or Gen Z type romance that felt accurate, that felt authentic. And then my final nominee, Mary Steenburgen for Happiest Season. This was a really fun movie and a great sort of Christmas time movie, and she was my favorite part of it. And she's similar to someone like Maya Rudolph, where she consistently just shows up and delivers A performances, whether it be in Step Brothers or something like all the way back in 1980 with Melvin and Howard when she won her Oscar. She's terrific in that. So she's been good for so long, and once again, her comedic timing really sort of solidifies the sort of judging mom stereotype and brings it to another level. So as soon as I saw her, I knew she had to get in. But ultimately, my winner was Andrea Riseborough for Possessor. And this is a movie that you're going to be seeing a lot because it was one of my favorite movies of the year. I'll tell you that right now. Every sort of element was so particularly crafted by director Brandon Cronenberg, but in particular someone like Andrea Riseborough, who was so great in the show 000, which was one of my favorite shows from this past year, and even in something like Battle of the Sexes, when I first really identified her as like, wow, who is this great actress? Or Mandy, she's so great and consistently doing great work, and seems to be almost like a young Tilda Swinton-esque in her alien type face and in sort of her blank expression. But it's more than that. It's not just that she has a unique face or that she's able to play in this way kind of like a distant, cold character. It's that she's able to bring the emotional element to that. It's not just the distant element, but it's also this emotional connection that ultimately adds to the complex element, where you understand that this is a weird situation and she's maybe not exactly as she seems to be, but you still understand her motives, you still sort of sympathize with her and really try to get within her character. And even though she's actually not that, she's a supporting actress, her presence looms very large without the movie. You're always looking at another actor sort of through her lens, and I think Andrea Riseborough is she made such an impact in the first sort of part of the movie. Then the second part of the movie, when we actually don't see her acting, we still see her acting. If you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. But she leaves a lasting impact on the movie and has this sort of, brings this sort of humanity to this sort of strange and distant character, which no other actor I think has done this year. And she has such a unique skill set that I can't wait to see what she does, because she is starting to become one of my favorite all-time actors. Okay, now going into the Best Supporting Actor category, my nominees are Ewan McGregor, Birds of Prey; Paul Raci, Sound of Metal; Aldis Hodge, One Night in Miami; Chris Pratt, Onward; Chadwick Boseman, The Five Bloods. And the winner is Paul Raci, Sound of Metal. So just going through them, Ewan McGregor from Birds of Prey, I thought he was a delicious, over-the-top kind of villain in Birds of Prey. Wore a suit and a costume like no other, and was really my favorite part of that movie because of how sort of over-the-top and sexist he kind of was in his villain way. Very few films really allow Ewan McGregor to have, he's a great dramatic actor, but to have this sort of amount of fun. I love these sort of fun villain roles, and as soon as I saw him in Birds of Prey, I'm like, wow, that was a standout for me. So Ewan McGregor had to get in. Aldis Hodge, One Night in Miami, which is the movie where I could have nominated any of them. All four of the men were so terrific in the movie, but ultimately the one that stood out for me, in part because no one else was really talking about it, but also genuinely he was my favorite performance of the movie, was Aldis Hodge playing Jim Brown. I thought he brought a real stoicism to the movie. It was also sort of a balancing factor. You know, there's the Malcolm X and the Sam Cooke and their sort of battle, and Muhammad Ali sort of in the middle, but Jim Brown is really able to bring the group together, to say things at the perfect time, which adds to, I think, Aldis Hodge's delivery and the way he said his lines. really made them seem like friends, and that was the connection that he brought to the movie, as well as being sort of the stoic, contemplative kind of a character who was really telling so much more through his face. Even, you know, he didn't have as much dialogue as I think someone like Malcolm X, but wasn't, you know, overcompensating for that in that way. He was able to communicate everything to us in the background. That even if he'd be in the background of the scene and Malcolm X and Sam Cooke would be sort of yelling at each other, my eye would glance towards him because of what he was doing. It's a fantastic job, I think, from him, and not being talked about enough. Chris Pratt, Onward, a movie I also really liked, one of my favorite animated movies of the year, and it's a voice performance, of course, because Chris Pratt's not in it, and Pixar is so great at all these situations, and I think for a lot of people, they maybe go, oh, Chris Pratt, what? And maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense in the beginning, and you're a little jarred by it, but I think by the end of it, you really believe in that character, you really believe in the emotional connection of that character, and I think the emotional connection and emotional impact that occurs at the last sort of end of the movie, a large part of it has to do with the real emotion and the real believability that I think Chris Pratt brings to a voice performance. That yes, he's over the top, but he can also do these genuine moments that I don't think we've really seen Chris Pratt do. He is Star-Lord and has a couple genuine moments in that sense, but they're always sort of tongue-in-cheek. This one seemed really sentimental and really sort of honest and genuine, and it showed even through his voice how great of an actor Chris Pratt is. And then Chadwick Boseman, The Five Bloods, playing this sort of messianic figure. And as much as I love someone like him, his performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, this was my favorite performance of his this year because of his sort of idyllic place within that movie, that he takes on this sort of heroic place. That, in my opinion, Chadwick Boseman's never been a super charismatic actor. But in someone like Black Panther, he succeeds in those roles. You know, Get On Up is interesting, but I like him in something like Marshall or Black Panther a little bit more because of his stoicism, because of his ability to sort of react to and interpret sort of thoughts, and he's a great actor who looks like he's thinking. And I think in *The Five Bloods, he's seen as sort of this Muhammad Ali guy who can say all these poetic elements, but ultimately it has to do with just that image of him and the way he carries himself as this sort of heroic figure that ultimately died, and they're doing everything in his honor. So once again, another character that looms large within the film, someone like Andrea Riseborough. But the winner was Paul Raci for Sound of Metal, because it was one of those performances that I think a lot of people found where I was like, who is this guy? Why have I never seen him before? He felt so real. He felt so genuine. He felt like a guy that has been doing this his whole life. He felt like an actual sort of a deaf therapist as his role. The way he delivered his lines, every instance and pause he'd have in between his words were really magnificent. I hope he does get nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars, because it seems like he does actually have a chance, even though he has sort of been slipping as of recent. I still think that, I hope that the Academy will recognize his performance, because he is someone that you don't know anything about. This could have gone to a Robert Duvall, this could have gone to an established actor, but went to him because of the authenticity that he brings to the role, which was so unique, and he brought everything to the movie, and he just totally, I think felt like this guy. That he didn't feel like an actor portraying this guy, that he was so ingrained within the character, in part because I'd never seen him before, but also because of how he delivers his part, and how he's able to sort of navigate certain situations like a therapist would. Is really brilliant. And in my opinion, as much as I love someone like Riz Ahmed, coming out of the movie, I was like, yeah, Riz Ahmed's fantastic in the movie, but also, who's Paul Raci? Is anyone talking about this guy? Because he is terrific. So definitely check out Sound of Metal if you haven't, but Paul Raci, much respect to him. Then my next category I have here is Best First Time Filmmaker, which is a first for us because I thought that this was a year with a lot of great first time filmmakers. So I have here Evan Morgan, The Kid Detective, Andrew Patterson, The Vast of Night, Max Barbakow, Palm Springs, Cooper Raiff, Shithouse, and Darius Marder, Sound of Metal. And the winner is Darius Marder, Sound of Metal. And I've defined this category as directors who have directed their very first movie, aside from documentaries. So there's, great people like Eugene Ash, for example, who did Sylvie's Love, who I didn't include because it was actually, their second or third movie, or someone like Lee Isaac Chung from Minari. It was a director who had done a bunch of other movies, but even though Minari was a sort of come-out movie, I didn't really introduce that in this category, just because I wanted to recognize people who this was their first movie and did terrific stuff with it. So Evan Morgan, The Kid Detective, a great great Canadian movie and a great Adam Brody performance. A movie that sort of is flying under the radar, but is really interesting as a sort of melancholic, depressing, black comedy detective movie, which is really interesting and definitely worth your time. And it's slipping under the radar, but I think it's one of those movies where I could easily recommend it to a lot of people because of just the format and the structure and the story it tells. I think would appeal to a large amount of people. Andrew Patterson, The Vast of Night. This was a movie I had some conflicted parts with it, but it's undeniable that this is a special director, that what he's able to do in the sci-fi genre with such a little amount of money is terrific. His ability to stage these long take sequences and weave in dialogue and create tension out of just people talking is incredible stuff. So Andrew Patterson is definitely someone where you look at it and you go, okay, he could be really interesting in going different ways with his career. Max Barbakow for Palm Springs. This is a movie that I really, really loved, and it could have easily been my winner, even though I really love the screenplay and actors. You know, I think for a lot of people, when they look at Palm Springs, they think of those elements, but it's also worth knowing that Max directed the movie and really was able to sort of get those performances, take the script and make it, and cut certain things and keep others, and make the colors really pop and colorful, and edit the movie. I mean, of course, every element comes down to the director. So Palm Springs was one of my favorite movies of the year, so I definitely had to recognize Max here, who I had no idea what he would do, and I think could be almost like a sort of Rob Reiner-esque, taking great scripts and making them, and you know, not trying to be too flashy with it, but just servicing the story really well, which of course we always need. And then in a different way, a very much auteurist, Orson Welles-esque, is Cooper Raiff for Shithouse, a guy who I believe wrote the movie, directed the movie, starred in the movie in sort of a really low budget element. What was so fascinating about this movie is how sort of emotionally vulnerable it is. I mean, almost to a fault. It's really, you know, the characters will have sequences where they just cry, or they'll have these sort of conversations that feel sort of mumblecore-esque, but definitely genuine to sort of the modern day college experience, and the vision behind it is singular to none. Of course, him starring in the movie helps in terms of that authorship of the movie, but it's incredibly impressive what he does in trying to find sort of tone in the movie. That the tone of the movie is really terrific in finding how it feels like to talk to a girl maybe at night, and the sort of the relationship dynamics of conversations and how things flow in and out. That doesn't feel like an Aaron Sorkin movie. The dialogue does feel naturalistic and real, and therefore that connects, I think, to the believability and of their romance and their connection. But ultimately the winner was Darius Marder for Sound of Metal, who was a person who's written a lot with Derek Cian-France, who I'm a big fan of, but Sound of Metal really blew me away. I'm going to be talking about it more later on, but just now, as this is Darius' section, mention how the movie is really great at subjective filmmaking, that someone like Martin Scorsese, I think, is the king of that, or someone like Jonathan Demme, these guys who have described it as humanist filmmakers. I think Darius Marder sort of apes a lot from that and takes a lot from that, constantly putting us in the perspective of Riz Ahmed's character, and of course he's becoming deaf, so we understand and we get to hear the sensory feeling of that. So in terms of a movie that really allows us to put us in the shoes of our character and really understand them, while also getting incredible performances out of someone like Olivia Cooke or Riz Ahmed, or unknowns like Paul Raci, is terrific. He's also an incredible visual storyteller. One of my favorite moments I'll be talking about later in Sound of Metal, in which you can tell things. You know, this is a movie that's all about sound and not necessarily about dialogue always. So what he's able to tell through these visual elements, through these style elements, I was really blown away, as it feels like a pro. It feels like someone who's made many movies before, in their confidence with how they tell the story, in terms of the framing, in terms of all the different elements, getting these great performances from these great actors. It was really terrific stuff. So Sound of Metal is a movie that I totally enjoy, and Darius Marder, I think, will have a really interesting and great career. But jumping into the moment section, this is a category I call best moment in a film. So it's just a snapshot, a scene, or just maybe an ending of a certain film, which I won't necessarily spoil, but I will talk about some of the scenes in depth, which I don't think any of them really spoil the movie. And if they do, I won't talk about it. Like, one of my choices here does spoil it, but I won't talk about it. So my first nominee here, I have Soul, what I'm calling the Life is Good montage, the epiphany scene. On the Rocks, Caviar Stakeout. Mank, the LB Mayer Walk and Talk. Sound of Metal, the slide scene. And Another Round, the ending. And the winner is Sound of Metal, slide scene. So as I was mentioning with Darius Marder, that was the scene in Sound of Metal I was so interested in. But starting off with Soul, the epiphany sequence, the Life is Good montage, is sort of the reflective moment, is sort of the climax of the movie. And what's so interesting in other movies like Finding Dory or some of the Cars movies, or more traditional movies, action movies, there will be the climax will be a big emotional revealing moment, or it's like a big action sequence or a big set piece. And what's interesting about Soul is that the moment of reflection is the climax. It's a reflective moment, it's an epiphany, and we see this great sort of combination of the score and different scenes. It's also a movie that, like the other great movies I like, plays with time very well, understands that, if you go on a journey at the end of the movie, if you cut back to previous scenes along the way, it understands and puts into context the journey that these characters went on and the time that they appreciated and spent together. And I think that does it in a real unique way of doing one of my favorite things film does, this sort of montage of images, disparate ones that we haven't seen before, previous ones reflecting back to over a score that is sort of the emotional climax of the movie. Onward does a similar thing, but I ultimately think Soul was the better one to actually execute on this epiphany that really solidifies and understands the character motivations and their wants and their needs. On the Rocks Caviar Stakeout. We're going to be talking about On the Rocks later, but my favorite scene from the movie is the scene where Bill Murray and Rashida Jones go out to spy on Rashida's husband to see if he's cheating on her, and they have that caviar and they chase him in this sort of beautiful red convertible through the streets of New York. It's a terrific, funny scene. It's classic Bill Murray getting his way out of a police ticket, and it's just a pure bliss moment, and it encapsulates so much of what I love about that movie. The L.B. Mayer walk and talk scene from Mank is the scene where Joseph Mankiewicz, or Gary Oldman's character, Herman Mankiewicz, is introducing his brother Joseph to L.B. Mayer, the head of MGM, and they sort of walk and they go, and L.B. Mayer sort of telling him his philosophy on movies, and people go to the movie theaters and they buy a ticket and they don't get anything in return. They get an experience, they get a memory, and that's why it's special. And MGM doesn't stand for Metro Goldwyn Mayer. All this sort of great, smart Sorkin-y type lines that really sort of blew me away, and is sort of an encapsulation maybe of why David Fincher, I think, really loves the movies, and in this sort of 4-minute situation, why I think I love the movies and many movie lovers do, and sort of encapsulating in a few words what the magic of the movies really is, into which he talks, and then into which he goes into a meeting, sort of a big lecture hall and auditorium, where he essentially tells people that he's not going to pay them for 8 weeks, and sort of the clear irony and contradiction of that, of being like, the magic of movies and everything's great, and also this is the business, this is the reality side, and I'm going to have to deliver these news to you in sort of a theatrical way. Terrific and sort of incredible encapsulation of what I think David Fincher sees, the good and the bad, the optimism, the cynicism of the movie industry. I thought was really great in this scene, and almost won. And then another around the ending of the movie, which I don't want to spoil because I love the movie, but the ending climax of the movie, the dance sequence, we'll call it, was really cathartic and beautiful and told more than words ever could. It is really, I think, the highlight of that movie. But ultimately, I went with the slide scene from Sound of Metal, which is a scene in a movie that occurs in some of the great movies when you're watching it and you go, oh, this is really fantastic. This is better than just any movie I've seen. And there's always, whenever you're watching a great movie, there's always a scene or something that happens where you go, wow, this is, and it sort of connects, and everything connects together. You go, this is a special movie. This is different. And the slide scene was that for Sound of Metal, where we go through the character's journey, and he has this hearing loss, and he's pretty much deaf at this point, and he can't really hear anything. So he's working with these deaf kids, and he's at this scene at the playground with one of the kids, and he starts banging on the slide, and our character, Riz Ahmed's character, really starts to hear the vibrations and then starts to bang a little bit back, in which he sort of responds to. And it's this brilliant moment because, of course, these are deaf children. He's deaf and he's working with them, and they both can't hear, but they can still feel the vibrations and so those low frequencies. And of course, you realize that, oh wait, yeah, that's right, Riz Ahmed's character was a drummer. He's gone through this emotional journey that we always forget what his profession was, what his love is, what his passion is. And it's never expressed, in the movie. There's all about frustrations about hearing, but we never really get to hear his side of the thing that I love the most, which is drumming, which is playing music, I can't do anymore. That's an element of it, but it wasn't until this sort of final scene that we sort of see an optimistic viewpoint of it. It's like, yeah, I can't do that anymore. That sucks. My life is in a way kind of ruined. But also, there's still these small moments of bliss, of humanity that sort of sealed the movie together in many ways for me, in terms of the optimism of getting over it, but also this small, very visual situation where it starts happening and then you understand what's happening and then you understand its context within the movie, and then you go, wow, this is such a smart, visually told scene that is better than any piece of dialogue in terms of emotionally delivering, I think, some of the themes of the movie. And it's a scene that doesn't need to be in there, but it's probably the most critical scene in the movie, even though it has nothing to do with further advancing the plot. Now into my best design category. This essentially accumulates sound design, costume design, production design, makeup, and hairstyling into one category, which I thought for movies that had the best world or had the best visual aesthetic, aside from something like cinematography, which would have to do with framing, things like that. This is actually the contents within the frame, so I call it best design. My nominees are Emma, First Cow, Sound of Metal, Possessor, and Onward. And the winner is First Cow. So Emma is a terrifically costume movie. What I love about Andrea Wild's version is that she makes it so much more colorful, that so much of the period garb that's probably more accurate has to do with muted colors and whatnot. But actually, if you read many of these characters, like someone like Marie Antoinette, you realize that they were wearing pink and lime green because these colors weren't available to them. That we always think of the period piece as being very muted, but actually there was very colorful at the time. And I think Emma appreciates that and incorporates that. We're also trying to make it feel more modern and more sort of poppy in a certain way, which I really liked about Emma. First Cow was the winner, so I'll talk about that later. Sound of Metal. This is a different kind of a design because I felt everything was authentic. It was very realistic in that sense when he goes to the therapy camp, we'll call it, the location of where it was set, the sort of griminess of the walls and the paint chipping felt like something that's been lived in, felt like it was in the middle of sort of nowhere, but it all felt sort of accurate and true. So it is realism on this extreme level, which maybe isn't always appreciated, but I definitely enjoyed it. And of course, the sound design of the movie is the best of the year, so that incorporates the design element as well. Possessor almost won in this category because of how strange and sci-fi and futuristic it is in its sort of practicalities. That it's not a big budgeted Spielberg movie. That is a small budget sci-fi movie, something like Ex Machina it reminded me of in that same respect, where it doesn't have a lot of budget, but it does great stuff with what it does have in seeming like a world that could exist even something like 5 years from now. It's set in our world, but it still has these sort of sci-fi futuristic elements, and the different sort of corporatization of that was very interesting as well. And Onward, even though this is an animated film, I love the world of this. I loved the fantasy element, the fantasy that went away. So now in a world where, you know, there's centaurs, but now they figured out technology, so they don't need magic, so they can use a car because they don't need to run. All these different elements. I thought it was a very unique idea and a very special idea, and they did a lot with that idea and playing around with it. So the design of all the characters was really terrific as well. But the winner is First Cow. And I think Kelly Reichardt's one of the best to do this in terms of her design and prefer particularly her period films in something like a Meek's Cutoff, or in this case First Cow, where it feels like this is not filmed in 2020. It felt so much like a movie that was filmed in the 1800s or the late 1770s in America, in the sort of Oregon, sort of Pacific Northwest, where there's no societies, there's no sort of cities built. This is very much in the woods, man, and the brink of nature. King Lou, the character, talks about how, you know, nothing has been named in the movie, which is a really great sort of thesis in certain ways for his perspective on the movie. But there's a situation where there's not really a town. It's just like someone built a shack here, and then to next to them there's another shack, and it's really dirty, and, you know, there's scenes where they have to just sweep up the floor, that there's not really any tables. It's very ramshackled in that way, and even their clothing feels like sort of all put together. And you realize that the founding of all of this country is, of course, the First Nations people had already been here, but the people who came over, the sort of settlers, their life didn't start with the sort of glamour of the Las Vegas Strip, that it was really a lot of these people who were scavengers and poor people from the British colonies who came over and built the country very much from a low place. So seeing the first cow in that perspective, and how Kelly Recker was able to really nail that, added so much to the film in terms of believing and a certain level of escapism because of how accurate it was. Then the next category I have here is Best Documentary, with my nominees being Dick Johnson is Dead, Boy State, Zappa, Collective, and The Dissident. And my winner is Dick Johnson is Dead. So one nominee here, Boy State. This is a fascinating documentary and a situation where they follow these 4 boys in this sort of political camp for political young men in Texas, and stumble upon 4 of the men who turn out to be sort of the big players within this race, and sort of were able to keenly identify who would win. They have this sort of, and they all have their own little stories. That one's almost like a Frank Capra-esque rise to power. There's one that's sort of more about the political manipulations and the back and forth and how they sort of start to learn the political system. And it's very interesting as an outsider to see the U.S. system sort of in a microcosm with these Texas boys. It is fascinating to see that, and the different political ideologies, and the conservatives are a little bit more popular within the Texas situation, and talking about secession and gun laws and what's interested to them, and then the chaos that of course these 16 and 17-year-old boys bring, but also the reflection of how that is to the political system and modern day politics was really interesting. Zappa is a fascinating portrait of one of the most interesting and elusive kind of figures since Bob Dylan, where he's not a total rock and roller, but he makes such interesting and fascinating, psychedelic, totally unique to himself music, and understanding the man better through incredible amounts of archival footage felt like an Amy-esque incredible document of the man himself. Collective was a movie that had I'm going to be talking about that later for its editing, fascinating editing, felt like a sort of journalistic spotlight kind of a movie. It was an incredible thriller, and you think, oh, that's weird because it's a documentary, but it also is a great thriller in that way, in terms of exposing this disinfectant scandal in Romania. And then the Dissident, the follow-up from director Brian Fogel for Icarus, about Jamal Khashoggi, the murder of the Saudi Arabian journalist, and what happened, and the sort of events that unfolded, and the connections with Saudi Arabia to the sort of Western world, and how that sort of disillusioned, and sort of the people who risked their lives to tell the story. It's a fascinating kind of modern-day political drama in that way, but it's a story particularly with the, to see who sacrificed and who did everything, and how the Saudi Arabian economy is so connected in many ways to the Western world, and how maybe their views conflict with a lot of the Western world's views, was fascinating, and how much influence maybe they have over our lives that you didn't think so. So it's a story about Jamal Khashoggi, but also about Saudi Arabia and larger political systems, which was a great political drama. But the winner was not any of those things. The winner was an existential, contemplative version of thinking about life while you're still here. In Dick Johnson is Dead, the filmmaker Kristen Johnson looks at her father before he is dead, talks about partially, and sort of films different ways about how he may or may not die in sort of comedic ways, which ultimately turns into sort of a frank and honest conversation with him about the future of his life. It's funny, it's heartwarming, but it's also contemplative, and there's a terrific sort of funeral-esque scene, which is emotionally rewarding. It's something like Afterlife, but in a documentary form and with real people, and the honesty that they're able to connect to while also sort of talking about larger themes. It's not pretentious in that way. It feels very accessible, and ultimately I really appreciate that element of Dick Johnson is Dead. One of my favorite documentaries of the year, and one of my favorite movies of the year. Then my next category is Best Screenplay. So I don't do Best Original or Adapted, I just do what I think are the best screenplays of the year. Now I haven't read all of these screenplays, I'm basing it off the dialogue and the structure of the eventual film, so it is sort of a weird category to judge because I'm not actually judging the screenplay itself, but ultimately the screenplay that is assumed to be based on the final dialogue and the structure of the film. So my nominees are On the Rocks, Sofia Coppola, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Charlie Kaufman, Palm Springs, Andy Ciara, Mank, Jack Fincher, and One Night in Miami, Kemp Powers. And the winner is Palm Springs, Andy Sierra. Now what's interesting, I'm just reading this now, is that all my nominees are single writers, that there's no sort of duos or rewrites, and I think that has a testament to my appreciation of the screenplay that are unique, that many, I think all of these movies are unique in their own special way and have a singular voice, the good and the bad that comes with that, with having sort of a single writer instead of doing sort of multiple rewrites of a script, that they've had such a great script that either they directed it itself, but most of these people, about half of them didn't direct the movie, so they are sort of singular writers, and their voice was able to be projected onto the film. So someone like On the Rocks or Sofia Coppola, one of my favorite movies of the year, and the banter and the dialogue between Bill Murray and Rashida Jones feels very natural, feels like a real mother-daughter relationship, but also feeling fun and ecstatic and talking about these things and the perfect and balancing the perfect tone. Now that has a lot to do with Sophia as a director, which I may be talking about later, but the script itself in terms of the dialogue really felt genuine, really felt fun because it has sort of this caper-esque kind of a feeling to it, but also through the performances, but also through the dialogue and what was written, feels like a relationship, that Rashida's character talks differently to her dad versus her mother versus her husband versus her kids, and all of it felt sort of genuine, that I never questioned, is Bill Murray really her dad? And I think a lot of that has to do with how the dialogue is written and the different changes in that. I'm thinking of anything's Charlie Kaufman, one of the most packed full, referential, best adapted movies I've seen. So I read the book, I'm thinking of anything's, which I'm a huge fan of, and what he does with the movie gives book lovers, lovers of the book, I think, an appreciation of what he does, because you get, I think, an extra bit of context which helps understand the movie, but also the movie's completely different. The movie, especially in the second half, strays away from the plot of the book very much so. So it feels like an adaptation instead of just the film version of the book, which is always something I really appreciate, while still trying to get the theme and the tone and the atmosphere and the thriller atmosphere that the book brings, adds to it and even expands upon it with the pack chock full of references, the complex layers that Charlie Kaufman's able to do, using characters as a way of voicing mechanisms, but also using it as a referential way to talk about how characters are being used in movies. I mean, it's a movie that you want to watch over and over and over again and watch sort of Easter egg videos because of all the chock full references that you can't even pick up on the first time around, and then reading them, you have such an, I think I had such an appreciation of the movie, and particularly the script of what he's able to pack in within the movie. And then Mank, Jack Fincher, of course written by David Fincher's father, but maybe had some punch-ups done by Eric Roth, the screenwriter who ultimately produced the movie. And what the script is so great at is delivering on these sort of fast-paced 40 screwball comedy dialogue, which is so great. Herman Mankiewicz is sort of an idealized writer version of a character where he's able to say the best lines at the best time, and he has this sort of witty, cynical approach. And while there's a lot going on in the movie, I think it has these great little microcosms, these great scenes of dialogue between Amanda Seyfried and Gary Oldman, these eloquent proses as he goes on these big monologues, being a writer, but also some of these more smaller elements of mentioning in the gubernatorial race of California, and some of those elements and how the themes relate maybe to modern day politics, but also within the film and the character. And really, I never question character motives, that I always understand where people are coming from and sort of who they are in these small little scenes, and a lot of that has to do with the screenplay. And One Night in Miami and Kent Powers, which is based off his play, but adapting into a movie and keeping it in that sort of 2-hour time frame, and allowing these situations where the characters can go off and be by themselves, and sort of we can have a Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke sequence, or we can have a Jim Brown, Malcolm X sequence, and we can sort of see their different interactions together as a group, but also individually, how that changes. It's fascinating. And it is a big one-log conversation about being black in America and your responsibility. I think it confronted a lot of those issues in a delicate way, in a smart way, and in a head-on way, that it wasn't trying to sort of gloss over things or do too much illusion, that it very much is talking about these topics head-on, which I really appreciated, with sensitivity, but also with bluntness that made it important in your face, that you had to sort of confront these issues that I thought Kemp was really able to do naturally through the dialogue, which isn't always true with plays adapting to movies. But the winner was Palm Springs for Andy Ciara, which is a fascinating sort of group where it's like, so it's the Lonely Island producing it, but none of them wrote it? Huh, that's weird. So who's this Andy Ciara guy? He essentially takes the Groundhog Day genre and turns it into even more of a romantic comedy, where Groundhog Day is reliving the same day over and over again to eventually find the love of his life. What happens if you have someone stuck with you in this sort of time loop? It's a fascinating sort of premise, but the solution and how the movie it's edited and goes along, and ultimately sort of the partially absurdist kind of approach to the movie that it takes of the philosophies of it. Something like Groundhog Day, it's interesting how that movie definitely has a philosophy of how to live life and the purpose and meaning the same way Palm Springs does. But that's also not to discount, this isn't a philosophical movie, that this is a comedy, and made me laugh, I think, more than pretty much any other comedy this year. It is so funny. There's so many great small little lines and situations, and I think ultimately the structure of the movie has something that totally impressed me, along with the funny lines that are riddled throughout the movie, how everything sort of connects together in sort of a perfect Groundhog Day way. It's a terrific story and a terrific plot. You know, we'll see something like Russian Doll or Happy Death Day. We've seen this done before, but it's rare to get the structure so right. It feels like a modern day Groundhog Day, and when I watch the movie, I just feel so good, and you pick up certain things on multiple times, and funny enough, a movie that repeats over and over again is still a great rewatchable. So if you haven't seen Palm Springs, definitely check it out. I think it's got the best script of the year. Okay, this is one of my favorite categories, a new one that I introduced a couple of years ago, I think now. This is Best Small Part. So not a supporting actor, not a lead actor, sort of just a one scene or two scene situation where an actor comes in, totally nails it, and is completely memorable. So my nominees are Jenny Slate for On the Rocks, Meredith Hagner, Palm Springs, Tom Burke, Mank, Marceline Hugo, I'm Your Woman, and Max Greenfield for Promising Young Woman. And the winner is Jenny Slate, On the Rocks. So we have here Meredith Hagner, Palm Springs. I just mentioned how much I love that script and the funny lines, and Meredith Hagner has like a "wait, what?" line that she sort of reprises and is so funny, and it's totally nails this character where we don't see her too much, but whenever I see her, she's very funny within the movie. She always makes me laugh. She has sort of this dumb blonde kind of energy, but still sort of very sweet. Her wedding speech is hilarious and a great microcosm of terrible wedding speeches, and Meredith completely commits to that. So whenever she's on screen, I always found myself laughing. She's probably made me my favorite comedic performance within that movie. Tom Burke for Mank, standing on the shoulders of giants, literal giants, in someone like Orson Welles, and nails it. I thought his voice, which is the commanding element of Orson Welles, was totally accurate. His presence as sort of physical being, was dominant and there and very clear and understanding. And he's very much not in the movie as much as maybe you would think, but man, is his presence known, and that's definite, I think, when we're watching the movie. Marceline Hugo for I'm Your Woman, an underseen movie, but she plays the sort of kind neighbor to Rachel Brosnahan's character, and sort of her small little section in the film is great because I think she totally understands who this character is. She plays this odd situation where Rachel Brosnahan's not supposed to trust anyone, but this seems like a really nice, genuine person, but you're trying to understand and trying to guess, is this a really genuine, nice person? Or is this someone that could maybe kill me? Is this, a secret situation? What's going on here? And trying to judge that out. And Marceline Hugo understands how the audience is feeling and is sort of playing that out in a certain way. That, of course, it's the filmmaking that's able to do great things, but also Marceline Hugo, sort of the way she delivers her lines, have this sort of dual meaning, where as the audience member, you're still not sure until ultimately it's revealed what happens. And then Max Greenfield for Promising Young Woman, a similar way to Meredith Hagner, except he plays a sort of Chad, dumb jock guy who is completely sort of over the top and is sort of the traditional jock, but shows up in the sort of last 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the film, and is a central character in this last little bit of the movie, I think, but is so funny in his physical actions and just how he kind of moves his face, his line delivery of the sort of dumb jock. It is really funny, and in my opinion, the contempt that they have for someone like his character, but ultimately mining a comedy out of that situation. I thought Max Greenfield totally understood that character and what his role in the movie was. But the winner was Jenny Slate for On the Rocks, because she's a definition of a great small part, where she shows up, she does a shtick, and then, you know, and it is very much used in a repeating comedic fashion, which I always appreciate. Movies that, like the Coen brothers, which repeat lines or repeat scenes that call back to previous moments, and when done enough times are ultimately funny, because they become funny and then they're not funny and then they're so ridiculous that they are funny. And Jenny Slate is in a situation like that, where she is, as Sofia Coppola would define, the extrovert in the movie, where she's always talking, and we see Rashida Jones' character goes like, yeah, and she's clearly not listening, but Jenny Slate's character doesn't really care, and she has this sort of mini arc throughout the movie talking about this guy who she's dating, but maybe she knows she's not supposed to be dating, but she still does anyway, and she's sort of this blabbermouth talk, but never gets offended if Rashida Jones has to leave. She's just sort of the bubbly extrovert, and that pops in these small little moments and realizes how sort of chaotic and adds to the chaos actually of Rashida's life in terms of going to school and social engagements and things like that. Then we have Best Ensemble. My nominees are Palm Springs, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, On the Rocks, Mank, and One Night in Miami. And the winner is Mank. So Palm Springs, I mentioned Meredith Hagner, which is great, but really Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti, and even someone like J.K. Simmons, who really shouldn't be in this movie, shows up and is so terrific and great, and everyone knows their part and plays it well, and works in terms of, particularly though I think those three main characters of the romance between Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti. They're both so charming, they're both clearly movie stars, but also some of the great supporting stuff from June Squibb and J.K. Simmons, who brings some of the more dramatic elements to life and the more philosophical elements, while still being great comedic actors. I mean, we forget J.K. Simmons. We think of him for something like Whiplash, which he's terrific in, but we also forget he's J. Jonah Jameson in Burn After Reading, which he's so funny in. So, you know, seeing more comedy from him is always a great thing. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, I think, is terrific. I think, you know, Jesse Buckley, Jesse Plemons, the two Jessies are people that are clearly going to be in movies for the future, particularly someone like Jesse Plemons, who is in Judas and the Black Messiah more recently, and it's like the sort of secret sauce to every great movie, that you throw a little Jesse Plemons in there and you know what, it's going to be great. And he doesn't care about being in starring roles. He'll be in a small movie in The Irishman because it's a Martin Scorsese picture and he makes it better. And then someone like Toni Collette and David Thewlis as the parents are so terrific, and it's really the sort of four characters, but them together, I didn't nominate any of them in any of my categories because I wanted, in a way, save them for Best Ensemble, because they actually do work really well as an ensemble. You know, because they almost all have individual scenes. So Jesse Buckley's character will interact with just David Thewlis or just Toni Collette and have these weird, odd Charlie Kaufman-esque scenes, but they're all sort of perfectly pitched to the movie and the weirdness of the movie. On the Rocks is a movie I already mentioned. Rashida Jones, Bill Murray. I think Marlon Wayans is really terrific. Even the kids are both very sweet, and the small parts that, you know, that will show up within the movie, of course, someone like Jenny Slate, feel genuine, feel authentic, and I loved pretty much everyone in the movie. And then One Night in Miami, I mentioned those four men. They're really terrific. Ultimately, I went with Aldis Hodge as my favorite, but they're also terrific in bringing the elements of these characters that we know, taking the element that we know of Muhammad Ali, and really able to, I think, deliver the humor of it, or Kingsley Ben-Adir's ability of Malcolm X to sort of the stoicism that he's not Denzel Washington, but brings sort of stoicism, but also unsureness and insecurity to the character that we really, I don't think, have totally seen. And all the performances from these young men, who are mostly, you know, still young actors, were just blown away that Regina could find four young actors that were so terrific. It was really amazing and really benefited to the success of the movie. But the winner is Mank, because there's so many of these roles where I don't know if they're small parts or they're supporting actors. I didn't know where to put them. Someone like Arliss Howard is brilliant as L.B. Mayer, or Ben Kingsley's son, who plays Irving Thalberg, or Amanda Seyfried's terrific. Charles Dance, who has not a lot of dialogue, but definitely has a looming presence of someone like of William Randolph Hearst. And of course, Gary Oldman is terrific as Mank in terms of his line deliveries and sort of his balance of optimism and cynicism and being able to sort of get drudged into the sort of guy who's clearly a smart guy, but working in a system that maybe he doesn't appreciate and doesn't think is very respectable. It's just every performance is finely tuned, and even if they're in a movie for a small bit, they're perfectly attuned to the period and also the dialogue and what their role and service in the movie is. So even though it didn't get in for Best SAG Ensemble, I think Mank is the best ensemble movie of the year, funnily enough. So now, Best Cinematography. My first nominee is The Way Back, Edward Grau. On the Rocks, Philippe Lassard. Possessor, Karim Hussein. The Nest, Matthias Erdely. And The Invisible Man, Stefan Ducio. And the winner is Possessor, Karim Hussein. The first one here I want to mention, The Way Back, Edward Grau. This is a movie that really stuck with me throughout the entire year. Its ability to have the close-ups at the intimate moments, but also these wide shots, sort of isolating Ben within the frame and sort of communicating visually the sort of trials and tribulations and the success and the failures when they sort of frame him lower parts within the frame, isolated by himself, off kilter. But then the successful moments when we see him, these low angle sort of sweeping hero shots when he's coaching basketball, and how he's able to sort of understand the character's emotion through the visuals and through the framing and through the cinematography. Then On the Rocks, Philippe Lassard, which is not a totally eye-catching, sort of drawing to you cinematography. It fits the movie very well, but there's some great scenes where we have beautiful, bright colors and things are very crisp and clear, and also you can see some of the depth of field and how he plays with that is interesting, on top of sort of the great design that he's able to do, of course, within the costumes and all the design elements of the movie are terrific as well. And Philip plays with that and plays with colors in a really interesting, dynamic way that always popped and caught my attention. The Nest, Matthias Erdely, similar to something like with Way Back, in terms of its framing, still framing, allowing characters to sort of walk in and walk out of the frame, but also communicating sort of division visually between the characters. Also great blocking within the movie, and we'll have a single shot and have characters talk, and we're still able to see everyone's faces and how their body language changes, and sort of the confidence that this movie had, I really appreciated. And The Invisible Man has a sort of slow, dreadful push in of the camera. Something like It Follows or John Carpenter-esque, of the dread of just slowly, lethargically moving in on a subject. And also the complexity that was required in the fact that you have the Invisible Man who's not actually there. He's invisible. So you have to sort of accommodate certain parts of the frame for the audience's interpretation of where the Invisible Man is and sort of the static elements of there. It has, of course, major props to someone like Lee Manel, but also the cinematography of the complexities that you have to factor in of actually having a character who's not there. But the winner, I think, far and away, was Karim Hussein for Possessor because of the strangeness. This is a cinematography that is not going into the background, that is very much in your face, that, like I mentioned with the design element, that it has this realistic world but has the sci-fi elements brought into that realistic world. But the bold decisions that he makes in terms of just striking shots that I remember of someone like Christopher Abbott and the tracking shot of him just walking and the sort of framing that he chose of that. But more importantly, it's scenes where Andrea Riseborough's character is just baked in sort of this red light, and she's in the corner of the frame against this sort of larger red wall, which is striking and unusual. And these framings and these choices of cinematography add to the unusualness and the strangeness of the movie. And also using, of course, color and color theory to sort of express the emotions, I think, and understand some of these more oblique characters, to understand more of their emotions through the colors of the movie. And also, I appreciate the boldness to just go, this scene is entirely in yellow, and intersperse these strange shots to keep the sort of elusiveness of the characters, but also the strangeness of the world intact. Often has to do with the eye-catching cinematography. Then I have here Best Trailer. This is always my favorite ones. So I have here I'm Thinking of Ending Things, official trailer. Tenet, final trailer. Judas and the Black Messiah, official trailer. Nobody trailer. And Dune, official trailer. And the winner is Tenet, final trailer. Some years there's a clear and far and away winner, but this one was a little bit more difficult. I really could have given it to any of them because they were all terrific. But ultimately, I went with Tenet because it was the movie where I almost wish the movie was the trailer in certain ways, and maybe ultimately wanted to see the movie that I'm watching, which is what you want a trailer to do, hype you up for actually to go out and watch the movie. But the first one I'm thinking of, Anything's trailer, has all the strangeness and weirdness of a Charlie Kaufman movie. And I think if you watch that movie and you're not interested, it's a great trailer, because if you watch it and you're not into it, you're probably not going to like the movie. But if you are into it and you are into the mystery element and the strangeness and the offbeat kilter the film, I think, so brilliantly captures, then you will be into the. So if you're into the trailer, I think you will be into the movie. So it is a great sort of litmus test if you're going to enjoy the movie. Judas and the Black Messiah has a propulsive, interesting, revolutionary kind of a trailer. You blending some terrific cinematography from Sean Bobbitt to sort of these drum pulsing beats. It's a great kind of trailer, but it's exciting and interesting, and you immediately go, what is that movie? When is that coming out? I want to see that. I'll be there day one. It was one of those trailers when I first saw it, I was like, what is this movie? And then I go, oh, this is clearly a great movie. It helped, of course, because of its great trailer. Nobody. This was another sort of out there movie where I was like, oh, I never heard of it. And I saw the trailer. I'm like, Bob Odenkirk, by the same guys who did John Wick. It's a fascinating premise of this guy who is a nobody, who is just sort of a dad who retired his life of being a sort of a badass guy. And then has to sort of come out of retirement, John Wick style. And you never think, oh, Bob Odenkirk, Better Call Saul, is that really the guy who's going to do it? And he looks terrific in the movie. And using the song Nobody is terrific in the end, and how it's just all cut together. Introduces the topic, sets it up in a pretty simple way. And it's like, boom, great action movie. I'm excited. I want to see that right away. And then finally, Dune official trailer, which I thought was great at sort of building up the mystery, but also building up the world and sort of the tone that I think ultimately it will connect to. So that's the one movie that I go, probably Dune or Nobody. It's like my most anticipated for 2021, in part because of their trailers. But the winner was Tenet final trailer, because it's a 3-minute long trailer. It has all the great moments. It has the Travis Scott song playing throughout. It explains the movie, I think, very clearly. It's going to be, in terms of things go into reverse. It's actually a better sell than people sort of give it credit for, and understand sort of its spy, international kind of roots in these great scenes. And it's one of those movies one of those trailers where I go into it and I go, man, I just want to see the movie right away. I just want to turn it on. It gets me hyped to watch the movie, with the Travis Scott song to get you interested, but also the sort of slick, clean tracking shots of the opera scene and whatnot are communicative so well that when I watch the trailer, I go, wow, I have to see this movie right away. Even though the movie is a little bit more mixed in terms of how confusing it is, the trailer is actually sort of a great encapsulation of how I felt in the best moments of the movie, compiled in this 3-minute trailer. So I appreciated that. So now, getting into the final 4 categories, the big ones going here now. Best Director, the nominees are Eliza Hittman, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always; Sofia Coppola, On the Rocks; Brandon Cronenberg, Possessor; Darius Marder, Sound of Metal; and Thomas Vinterberg, Another Round. And the winner is Sofia Coppola, On the Rocks. So we have here Eliza Hittman for Never, Really, Sometimes, Always. I haven't talked about the movie yet, but I will be talking about it in a couple minutes, because Sidney Flanigan was one of the best performances of the year. Terrific in this movie, and I think in terms of the social realism element of whether British social realism or Italian neorealism, there's a long history of movies, of documenting people and real life sort of situations with as realistic as version as possible. And I think Eliza Hittman totally understands the genre and completely enters into it. Something like Fish Tank, it reminds me of in many ways, in its approach to making something that feels as realistic as possible. That's its goal, and boy does it achieve its goal in terms of the drudgeries and what's needed and the procedures and ultimately the emotional connection with this character for getting an abortion out of state. It's really heart-wrenching, and Eliza's completely able to put us into the character's understanding of, in this case, Sidney Flanigan, her mental state, and also the friend and the sort of journey they go on, and the persistent sense of, I just want to get this over with kind of a feeling is so clear, so authentic. And Eliza really blew me away in terms of making it a socially realistic movie that in a way is not political in many ways. It just sort of documents and shows the events and allows you to come up with a sort of your own interpretation, but ultimately the sympathy and understanding is unparalleled, and that's what those great sort of realist movies have done, and I think she joins the ranks with some of the greats. Then I mentioned here Brandon Cronenberg for Possessor, in a similar way, has a very clear, distinct style. I mean, the style of the movie is disturbing, and it's strange about a person who sort of implants themselves into another person's mind to take over their body and then execute a murder. Brilliant performances getting out of Christopher Abbott and Andrea Riseborough and Jennifer Jason Leigh are all perfectly attuned to the strangeness of the movie, the appreciation and the embracement of that strangeness and sort of the horrific kind of elements and really disturbing elements of the movie. They're not disturbing because there's a whole lot of gore, but because of the content matter, because the approach Brandon Cronenberg takes and the tone and the atmosphere that he's able to bring is so clear and so precise. That is one of the most striking and memorable movies I've seen this year, and a lot of that has to do with sort of the clear vision that Cronenberg had. The Darius Marder Sound of Metal, which I talked about as my favorite, first-time filmmaker and all the benefits there. Check out that part. But then Thomas Vinterberg for Another Round, who was a foreign director who really tackles this movie where it could be schlocky, it could very easily be schlocky, it could be very comedic, it could be very dark, and he's able to do both. He kind of shows drinking in this perfect light of something that can be positive but can be negative, and sort of the positives and negatives of it, and where things can go if not under control, or maybe things ultimately do control, about sort of the friendship of these men, but also how alcohol can destroy their friendship but also destroy their lives and slip into sort of a dangerous place. And its balance of comedy and drama is really particular, and also the Danish culture of drinking and understanding the culture through drinking, but also trying to make it more of a universal film. His level of detail of making a fascinating movie with a lot of complexities without explaining a lot of them and making them so obvious, but telling them through visually and through ultimately the story, it is a fascinating situation. He's a great director. He did something like The Hunt with Mads Mikkelsen before, which is another terrific foreign film. So check out his movies if you haven't. He's a great director, and I can't wait to see what he does next. But the winner was Sofia Coppola for On the Rocks, one of my favorite movies of the year, and I think both the writing, which I mentioned before, but clearly her direction is particularly on par, I think, in this movie, more than even so her other movies. Of course, she's a terrific director, but I mentioned kind of the costumes, the sort of motifs of Sofia Coppola, of Rashida Jones' character's watch that she uses within the movie, and how that sort of changes, and the symbolism with that, which isn't told to us, but it's clearly communicated if you're paying attention. The relationship, like I mentioned, the writing, how the dialogue between Rashida Jones and her husband, and Rashida and her kids, and Rashida and her father is all different, and sort of great theories that Bill Murray comes up with is terrific. How it is sort of structured, how it has this great light on its feet tone, which is so exciting, and you want to rewatch it. It's my most rewatched movie of the year because of that reason, because I always think about it and I go, hey, it's just a fun time. But also what she's able to do within the movie is not just make it a fun, light, easy breezy time, that there is an emotional revelation to the film and conclusion to the film, in a similar way to something like Wes Anderson, where Wes's movies are so dazzling and interesting that you're sort of interested by all the sort of particularities of his movies. And then when the emotional part happens, you kind of get hit by a train by them if they work, because you go, oh yeah, Wes has been building up all this emotional stuff. I've been distracted by all the interesting, fantastical parts, but then I get hit by a train by the emotional stuff because I finally realize what everything's been setting up to. I've been having so much fun with the setup that when the emotional climax comes off, I'm so blindsided that I'm even more emotionally connected. And I think Sofia Coppola does that here with On the Rocks, that you're having so much fun that you don't realize what she's able to do to set up the emotional connection. So when they're in Mexico and there's sort of a confrontation of why her father sort of left her mother, and why they got divorced, and why he is the way he is, and his respect towards women, and how that affects his relationships, really confronts it head on. And I felt it to be an incredibly emotionally powerful scene because it confronted it. We're having such a great time, then we're confronting this, yes, and we didn't need any more of that, we didn't need any less of it, but we definitely needed it. And the sign of how much is too much, and when to put it, and where things should go, it was all perfectly calibrated. And I think that's why I appreciated Sofia as a director in this movie, because it was one of my favorite movies of the year, but also how she told the story was perfect. Then the final three categories here. The first one, Best Lead Actress, Sadie Flanagan, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Elizabeth Moss, The Invisible Man, Kristen Milioti, Palm Springs, Carrie Coon, The Nest, and Sai Chin, Lucky Grandma. And the winner is Elizabeth Moss, Invisible Man. So Sidney Flanagan, never, really, sometimes, always. I mentioned it in the Elizabeth Hitman section that Sidney's really able to bring an empathy with this character and understanding of this character that she says very little, but in the sort of titular scene of the movie, which is the best scene, the never, really, sometimes, always scene in the movie, it is heartbreaking to see finally sort of the emotional walls come down, that she's very much sort of a woman on a mission, where she feels like a teenager, feels sort of confused, but also kind of distant and anti-authoritarian, kind of rebellious, but also emotionally vulnerable, that maybe she not shows it, but Sidney Flanagan as an actress, what she's able to do is show the audience that she's feeling something, but still show the character that she's not, in a way that the character is communicating to the other characters that she doesn't want to talk about it, but the actress, Sidney Flanagan, is communicating to the audience. We know that the way she's saying it and the way she's sort of using her face, she does want to say more. There is more of the story. You just have to sort of follow along until the reveal sort of definitely happens. And it's incredible for what she does at such a young age. Emotionally impactful, and really a terrific performance of saying one thing, but really communicating to the audience that something else is untrue. Kristen Milioti for Palm Springs, an actress that we finally go, oh yeah, she's great. She's a movie star. She's so charming, so funny, so romantic, so engaging in this movie. It's a classic movie star performance. I mean, I mentioned, I think it was last year, Maya Erskine for Plus One, which had a similar kind of a quirky kind of role, but still keeping it sort of movie star-esque and funny, engaging, and romantic. Definitely, Kristen Milioti fits in that gap. Carrie Coon for The Nest, which almost won as well. It's an underseen movie, but she's my favorite part of the movie, I think, because of this great dance sequence that she has, because of the vile elements of her, because of the trying and failing and trying to support her family, and the motherly sort of elements of her, but also sort of the rebellious kind of F this kind of attitudes and I hate this attitude, and sort of her change in her body language and her approach to her kids, as she sort of goes to England, and her skepticism, and then in terms of confirmation of the skepticism, and how she plays these little mind games is brilliant. And we kind of forget sometimes Carrie Coon is one of the best actors from something like The Leftovers. We forget, but you know, this is a movie that sort of confirmed. It's like, no, she's still great. She still does amazing work. And Carrie Coon, if you haven't seen this movie, it's worth it for her performance, and I think Jude Law's performance really alone. But also, it's still an interesting sort of marriage dynamic movie. And then this last one here, Sai Chin for Lucky Grandma. This is a movie I think that sort of went under the radar for a lot of people, but it's a totally fun movie. If you like someone like Zhao Shuzhen for The Farewell, or Yu Zhanyun for Minari, I think Sai Chin has the best sort of grandma performance of the year, Asian grandma performance. Very funny, very strict, playing this grandma who stumbles upon this money after this guy dies, going home from a casino and takes it, and then gets caught in the middle of a gang war. Very interesting in how she plays both sides and her relationships, and has a sort of grandmotherly sort of traditional element to it, but also a scaredness and feels younger. She has this badass energy too, and she's just a lot of fun and a total revelation for me watching the movie, and really holds the movie together because of her performance. But the winner was Elizabeth Moss for The Invisible Man, because in a large part, she's the reason why the movie is successful. That so many of these horror movies oftentimes fail because of poor actors. But so many of the great ones, something like Us from last year, was so terrific because of Lupita Nyong'o's performance. And I think the similar situation happened here with The Invisible Man, where Elizabeth Moss is probably the best actor at playing trauma and fear and just feel like she's crazy. She's the best out of anyone. I mean, all of her roles seem to have this. You know, she doesn't really do rom-coms. She's attracted to these roles, but also she's fantastic at these roles. And playing a character who has to sort of be crazy and paranoid all the time, but also trying to come over that and trying to get over this fear. And of course, the allegories to survivors of domestic abuse or sexual harassment or any of these situations are clear. And I think Elizabeth Moss is able to communicate that while also being sort of a terrific scream queen, and the level, I guess, gravitas that she brings to this great horror movie really helps succeed in terms of making this movie one of the most memorable movies, particularly with her performance. So I was really impressed by Elizabeth Moss. I still think she's one of the best living actresses, and when she does movies like this, it's like man, she can't do any wrong because she's really terrific. Now, best lead actor. My first pick is Ben Affleck for The Way Back. I have Adam Brody, The Kid Detective, Mads Mikkelsen, Another Round, Bill Murray, On the Rocks, and Riz Ahmed, Sound of Metal. And the winner is Bill Murray, On the Rocks. So you may go, Bill Murray, On the Rocks, isn't he supporting? He's supporting in the Oscars, but according to me, he's a lead actor. Now, I changed up some of the ones where I thought was supporting, I thought was lead. It's my award show, so I get to pick what I think, and Bill Murray for On the Rocks got in because I think his performance is one of the best of the year, and he is a lead of the movie. But Ben Affleck, The Way Back, once again, have we forgot about this movie? Did we forget about how great this movie is and how great of an actor he is? I mean, Gavin O'Connor is one of the best directors to sort of make sort of a masculine movie that has sort of like a single tear down your streak. It's a very emotional movie. It's a harrowing movie. And Ben Affleck, using his experiences from alcoholism, really portrays a sensitive and honest performance where it's brutish. He doesn't have many lines to say, but he's communicating his struggle and his wanting to succeed through his movies and through his actions. And he feels like a real life person who doesn't go on these big long tangents, but has an internal struggle. But that internal struggle, of course, being properly and beautifully communicated to the audience member through Affleck's performance. Adam Brody for The Kid Detective. When he sort of reappeared, I mean, he's always been a great actor in The O.C. and showing up in things, but I think when he sort of reappeared in a way for Ready or Not and playing a similar character was really impressive. So to see a movie like this where he really gets to be the lead and do so well, playing the sort of sad sack, depressive, melancholy kind of heroine that was very much common in the 40s, but now sort of the millennial kind of 21st century version of that, I thought Adam Brody was really terrific at portraying this modern day version of it, of this kid who is disenchanted, who couldn't solve a murder, and then everyone else sort of despises him within the town, and he's still sort of chasing this detective situation. And his ability to deliver the comedic lines, stuff like, I've solved over 200 mysteries, or just some of the more dramatic elements too of telling his sort of partner in crime, the girlfriend of the boyfriend who was killed and went missing. His dynamic between her is great. So his ability to sort of embody the sad sack, sort of depressive noir-ish detective, but also balancing the comedic and the dramatic. He's a large linchpin as to why the movie succeeds so well, and it was one of the most impressive performances of the year. So was Mads Mikkelsen for Another Round. For as much as I credit someone like Thomas Vinterberg for being able to balance the tone of the highs and the lows, Mads Mikkelsen is also able to communicate that. Communicate playing drunk or a little bit drunk. I mean, he's able to communicate being a little bit drunk, then a lot drunk, then sort of plastered in these different elements. I mean, for a lot of people and a lot of actors, playing drunk is difficult enough, but playing it at different levels, incredible testament to Mads Mikkelsen, while also bringing the humanist element. It's not just, can you play drunk for 2 hours? It's also, can you play drunk and communicate certain things in different states of substance being on so many different levels. Mads is a great actor, and once again, teaming with the Hunt director, Thomas Vinterberg, deliver another incredible performance. And then Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal. Even though I love someone like Paul Raci, Sound of Metal is still a movie I really love, and Riz Ahmed has a large reason to that he's able to communicate the frustration of not being able to hear and losing his life seemingly in one instance, in one go. His intense devotion and commitment to Olivia Cook's character, his girlfriend, his sort of addict-type behavior, because he used to be a heroin addict, but now is put into this therapy place, which is for addicts, but also for addicts maybe who are losing their hearing loss, and sort of the balance between that, and how he reveals some things, but also you can see he's defensive in many ways and is skeptical. And then the final shot of sort of the accumulation of him, and for us as an audience member, when we understand what he's hearing and when we hear it through the brilliant sound design of the movie, it's revelatory. But you also have to factor in the other element, that the sound plays a lot within the movie, but also Riz's characters. So much of the movie is close-ups and the small adjustments within his face. He knows what the camera is doing, and in such an acute way that few actors know how to do, that he knows how to tone down his performance or bring up his performance, and he knows how to do a small little gesture to communicate something so grand as, I finally understand it, or I'm depressed, or I don't know if I can do this. All these different complex emotions that he's able to communicate. But the winner is Bill Murray for On the Rocks, in a sort of movie star-esque performance. That so many times we reward the dramatic Daniel Day-Lewis's, but we never reward the Tom Cruises for Mission Impossible Fallout, being just totally, or Jerry Maguire, totally great, awesome movie stars. And I think Bill Murray may go down and be remembered for this performance. At least he should be. For a lot of people, this is the sort of myth of Bill Murray as a character. The sort of elusive, theory-based, incredible life, always charming and get out of any situation character. Now, he seems to be more sexist than hopefully, you'd think Bill Murray would be in real life, but that's the flaw of his character, that he's still lovable at the end of the day because of that, and Bill brings so much to that character, that it is sort of a meta kind of a way where we think of this character, we also think of how Bill Murray is in real life, but we also forget, because he doesn't show up in as many movies, how great Bill Murray is as a lead, how he's still a movie star today, how he can still probably open a movie and people will still go to it because he's got that charm, he's got that charisma, but he also has some of that self-depreciation kind of an element that ever since Rushmore, we've always seen Bill Murray in the 21st century as a sort of sad, depressive guy. But we forget that he's the guy who did Ghostbusters and Stripes, and we don't see that too often. So when we get a little bit more of a glimpse of that, we go, wow, I've been sort of starved of Bill Murray for a long time because of how terrific he is in this movie. And it's not a super dramatic movie, although he does sell the dramatic parts, and he does have some of that depressive element to him. For the most part, it's a movie star, it's a pure charisma performance, and boy, does he nail it. But now going into my best picture category with 10 nominees. So I chose 10. I'm not going to rank them. They're in alphabetical order of my favorite 10 movies of the year. And then I'm going to give you my thoughts on my favorite movie of the year. So here they are. Another Round. Dick Johnson Is Dead. Holiday. Mank. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. On the Rocks. Onward. Palm Springs. Possessor. And Sound of Metal. And the winner is On the Rocks. You guessed it. The most awarded movie of the night. And a surprise for me because I love Sofia Coppola's movies, but no one has really been talking about On the Rocks, even though I think it is the best movie of the year. But right now, let's go into Another Round. I talked about with Thomas Vinterberg, the balance between the highs and lows. Brilliant stuff, incredible Mads Mikkelsen performance, and a unique movie. And that's what we can get from international cinema, is a different approach to storytelling, which isn't the Spielberg Hollywood kind of approach. It's different. It's a little bit stranger, but it tells its story. The Spielberg way wouldn't really work. This way is the best way to tell the story and why it's so effective. Dick Johnson Is Dead, the best documentary of the year. Part existentialist, part absurdist, part humor-filled, life-affirming kind of a movie with sort of a brilliant thesis and a great documentary of blending the truth and confronting things head-on in an emotionally vulnerable, really way, an emotionally confrontational way in the best possible way. The Holiday was a great romantic comedy that I think people have sort of dismissed, but I like these kinds of movies. The chemistry between Luke Bracey and Emma Roberts is absolutely terrific. The movie is very funny, it's kind of explicit in very funny ways, and it's a great kind of holiday movie. Even though it may not seem like it, maybe you saw it and forgot about it, I thought it was a very well executed, very funny romantic comedy. I love that genre, so I thought I had to include it here. And I thought that, of course, Emma Roberts and Luke Bracey had great chemistry, and that's so key to so many great romantic comedies. Mank is a complex, interesting movie that I still wrestle with today, because some parts I go, that doesn't really make sense, but other parts I think it's absolutely brilliant, of David Fincher almost in a Curious Case of Benjamin Button style, where it's not just like pure cynicism and grit and the ugly part of humanity in the same way he does with Gone Girl or Zodiac. He is really interested in movies and in that system and the irony of that and the deplorability, but also sort of the majesty of it and that balance. And also, the movies about credit and some of the insider elements to that. But also my sort of approach to the movie was that it also has this sort of balance of being the benefits of cynicism versus optimism, or pessimism versus optimism, of going out on your own, of sort of approaching life with, I'm going to do things the way I want to do it. Where this is a man who's been bogged down by being sort of incredibly talented, but wasting away his talents. And only if he had the drive, and only if he had this. And finally, after writing so many scripts, that he didn't put his name on. He finally goes, no, this is something that I'm going to take a stand on. No, finally, if I didn't take a stand on the politics, I didn't take a stand for so much part of my life, it's finally him taking a stand. And that's what I sort of got at the end of the movie, is that sort of approach to cynicism being kind of recognizing it as a failure, and how when you do something you really enjoy, you have to be prideful, you have to be optimistic, and you have to go, no, this is my stuff. I can't be sort of depressive on the entire time. I have to really back my own movie in this sense. And I thought that was an interesting kind of a way that I approached the movie, which I appreciated. Never, rarely, sometimes, always. I talked about Eliza's ability to really nail in the realist elements of it, as well as the performance from Sidney Flanagan. Onward, movie. This is probably my favorite animated movie of the year. You may think, oh, what about Soul? Soul I had some complications with, but Onward I thought was really terrific and underrated. A great family-friendly, heartwarming adventure with incredible world, incredible design, great voice performances, but also that emotional ending climax is some of the best Pixar emotion elements that definitely hit personally for me. I thought it was totally rewarding, and a great sort of setup payoff script, where some of the stuff is like, why do they have to be there sometimes, but other times it's like, oh wow, I remember that, and everything comes together at the end and it's perfect and fits nice into a perfect little Pixar storytelling way. And even though it may be, middling Pixar for a lot of people, I thought it was really terrific, and it's one of my favorites in terms of Pixar, probably, top 8 or 9. Palm Springs, I mentioned how so much fun it is. It's one of my favorite movies of the year, because it's just like, you know what, I'm just going to watch that movie a lot. I'm going to rewatch it a lot. It makes me feel good when I watch it. It's just sort of perfect Hollywood storytelling and the kinds of movies that I like. Movie stars interacting with each other, having a fun time that's part philosophical, that's part funny, that's incredibly sort of structured and well typed. And that's a style of movie I really appreciate. So Palm Springs sort of hit that element for me. But in the opposite sense, Possessor was a movie that is strange and different and hard to judge, but the images are so visually striking for me. What Brandon Cronenberg was able to do in terms of having a clear vision of this sort of fascinating concept of somebody who takes over somebody else's body, but not in a Freaky Friday way, but in like a corporatization of our lives, of drudgery, of larger themes, I think, of purpose and of the sort of horrors of humanity, and how it can be manipulated and how they sort of have larger control of our lives. And it's not all like preachy in that way. It's not going to say all that. It's just strange and horrific and disturbing and such an odd tone, but laced in with all these themes. Very interesting to think about and to try to comprehend. It's fascinating. And Sound of Metal, I feel like I've talked about it a lot, but a brilliant movie. And then my final pick, the ultimate winner, was On the Rocks. And I talked about how Sophia's so great, and Bill Murray. I would talk about Rashida Jones. She's terrific in the movie and really leads it. And the small details of all elements of the film. But really, when I think of the movie, I think of a movie I'm going to rewatch. I'm going to go back to. It's already my most rewatched movie of the year. And it's also a movie that I think is, in a way, a time period movie. That, in my opinion, it is sort of this upper middle class to 2010s New York. And the best interpretation of 2010s New York. That for so many movies, when we think of 70s New York, we may think of Taxi Driver or French Connection, or even more modern day New York movies, something like Marriott Stories or the Noah Baumbach movies. I think of those movies as, in a way, similar to something like Woody Allen and the set in the 80s kind of 70s, 80s kind of New York. It starts to get a little bit more affluent, and in a way that those movies, the more Baumbach type movies, in a way are either period movies sometimes or reflected in past movies like Marriott Stories, which is a movie I love, but that could easily have been set in something like the New York in the 80s or 90s. But I think with On the Rocks, pre-pandemic, like 2010s of a certain class of the people that lived in New York. I mean, frankly, it's a very expensive city, so this was most of the type, the tech people and the writers and the sophisticated art dealers and stuff, and that sort of world is a great kind of perception of New York at the time, and I really appreciated that element of it. And like I said, it is more than just a caper. It is emotional too. but it is fun. It's movie stars, it's terrific writing, it's clear direction and writing from a person who knows what kind of story they want to tell and can't help but make something incredibly artful and unique and different and really unlike any movie I've seen. So in one way, it's a weird sort of summation is that it's a capitulation of New York, but that's what I always want to come back to. The same way I kind of maybe want to go back to grimy New York when I think of 70s New York or a Woody Allen film, and you want to go back to these locations, or even something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, going back to that time in Los Angeles of the sort of the 60s. I think I'll be going back to New York in On the Rocks of the 2010s, and I think that has a great merit to it, and hopefully it is well remembered, because it hasn't been doing very well in the award season and hasn't been showing up on a lot of top 10 lists, but it definitely is one of the best, in my opinion, movies of the year. It definitely was my favorite. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, this long video that's finally come to an end. Of course, check the comments in the description where you can jump around and hear my thoughts. Let me know some of your favorite movies. I'd love to hear them. There's a lot of big Oscar movies that I would consider 2021 movies because they were released in 2021 that I may be talking about next year. Judas and the Black Messiah, Minari, Malcolm and Marie, movies like that probably will be showing up next year's Connors if they happen. But the fifth year I've been doing them. I hope you appreciate my unique kind of different style of movie taste, and let me know your comments down below what your sort of style, what movie maybe you appreciated that no one else did, your Kid Detective or your On the Rocks or Holiday, we'll say. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and comment and subscribe. That stuff really helps, particularly in these sort of off the beat, long videos that are always hard to do. I always appreciate it. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.